Hello, Solar Cross here, and today we're going to have a look at some mistakes that even very expert miniature painters make when shading and highlighting, particularly with yellow and red, though in fact they do this with many other colors too. So stick around for that. So I just found this picture which um, typifies these three mistakes I'm going to talk about today. Um, it's not specific just to this model because plenty of other people are doing this. So it's quite a common thing, especially with the heavy metal style that Games Workshop tends to promote. Um, so yeah, it's quite a common thing. Okay, so I don't want to ruffle any feathers here. I'm not in any way saying, for example, whoever painted that um, fine looking gentleman there in the yellow armor is like, I'm not criticizing. The skill obviously is present, and he spent a lot of time on it. It's just the colors chosen for making the highlights and the shades are wrong. I'm going to just say that, right? And I think I understand why those mistakes are being made. So I'm just gonna walk through that in this video. And my purpose is simply to help us all become better painters, better miniature painters. Um, Not trying to make myself look good or anything. Just I think this is an observation I had, and I just thought I'd share. So, and you too can share if you think there's anyone that might benefit from this. My little pearls of wisdom. Do of course share this video in your social media networks, be it Twitter or whatever. Like and subscribe and all that. And so, without further ado, let's just go straight into each mistake as they happen. Okay, so this is our little yellow friend again, and as you can see, the painter here has um, highlighted the yellow with white, and I will say also, actually, he's highlighted the red sort of eagle thing on his chest with white as well, which has actually made it pink. Um, so this is the same mistake with two different colors, and the mistake is it's pretty simple. Um, why it's a mistake is when a color gets more light, it becomes more color is reflected back to the eye, not less. When you mix a color with white, you you don't make it brighter, you make it a pastel, you make it desaturated, you make it less of that color, you make it a different color essentially. And as a heads up, all three of these mistakes are using the wrong color for a highlight or a shade, a different color from what should be used. um, so when yellow gets more light, it doesn't become less yellow, it becomes more yellow, if that makes sense. um, So, just to illustrate this, here's a yellow Lego cube lit quite strongly from one side and with another side, obviously, in relative shadow. And, spot the white. There's no white there. It's more yellow on the lit side, and there's a sort of greyish desaturated yellow on the side in shadow. Um, and that's what happens in real life, and that's how you need to highlight, right? So I believe the reason they make this mistake is it's it's firstly it's from not observing reality. If you look at reality and try to recreate it, which is what a proper artist does, then you wouldn't make this mistake in the first place. What they're doing is using conceptual logic to reverse engineer what they think a highlight should look like. I think that it goes like this, right? You can shade a color by adding like dark gray or black, and that's pretty correct. Correct. Um, so surely to highlight a color, you do the opposite, which is to add white. But it doesn't work like that. The you know, as I said, the more light a color gets, the more saturated that color gets, not the less saturated. When you mix white, you make it desaturated. So white isn't the universal highlight. It's just not. The only useful pure white or any sort of pastel is is to be a color in its own right, because pastels exist, um, or to try to mimic the bright white spots you get from glossy or metallic surfaces, shiny surfaces. Shiny surfaces sometimes, in certain spots and streaks, can reflect all of the light back. They don't absorb any of the color into the surface, so all white, pretty much all the light gets reflected back, and of course that makes it white because white light will reflect, will appear white if it's all of it's reflected back. Um, so I mean, you can see little white spots on my glasses, right? That's from a lamp being reflected all the way back instead of being absorbed. Uh, and the light actually on my face is a bit too bright, and that's why it's yeah. So that's it. There is the one exception to using white as a highlight is to make shiny spots, glossy spots. Yeah, you can do that. That's fine. But as a just sort of general light, try to simulate a surface getting more light in a matte surface is just wrong, because it should be more saturated, not less. Okay, so that will wrap up mistake number one for now. Right, so mistake number two is to try to highlight a color with a different, supposedly lighter color. On this model here, he's actually made, he's tried to do this with red. He's tried to make the red highlighted with orange. He's used orange to highlight red. And actually, it's quite interesting that he's with his red here. He's made both highlighting mistakes. He's actually on the chest piece. He's used white to make it pinkish, and on the helmet and the trim, shoulder trim. He's used orange, and you can almost sort of see the logic, his train of thought here. At no point is he looking at reality. He's just using like his own kind of logic of how colors should work, right? So he's done his chest piece, and he's mixed a bit of white into his red to try to make it a lighter red. Instead made it pink. And he thought, that doesn't look right. That doesn't look right, does it? It looks all pink. And that wasn't really that wasn't the effect I was going for. And then he thought, oh, what am I going to do with the helmet and the shoulder trim? I can't use pink there as well, can I? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use orange, yes, because orange is a lighter colour than red. No, actually. See, this is possibly even a worse mistake than highlighting it with white, because orange isn't a lighter version of red. It's a different colour. it's a different colour. You know, yellow is a different colour from orange. Would you highlight orange with yellow? Or since the reasoning seems to be the higher the frequency, the lighter it is, right? Because orange has a slightly higher frequency than red, and yellow is a higher frequency than orange. Perhaps to highlight yellow, you should use green, and to highlight green, you should use blue. To highlight blue, you should use purple. Yeah, you see, the yellow, orange literally is a different color. It's not a more lit version of red. So here's another example. This is what red looks like. If you look at reality, this is what red looks like highlighted. I've got another Lego cube for you. Here we go. And as you can see, and it really shouldn't be surprising, what you actually see when you see red lit, well lit, is more red. And on the shadowed side, you see a sort of greyish, desaturated red. And that's how light works, you know. Um, when white light bounces off a surface, um, all sorts of colours are absorbed out of the white by the surface, and whatever's not absorbed is reflected back, and that's the colour you see. And obviously, the more light that's shining on that surface, the um, more colour you're going to see. The more of that colour you're going to see, and the less light you get, the less of that colour it's going to look. Desaturated. Shadows are desaturated. This is the golden rule of lighting in lighting colours is the more well lit, the more saturated. The more in shadow, the more saturated. The more greyish it is. The more until you go all the way to black, right, where there's no light coming out. And you can see this every day. You go outside on a high noon on a summer's day when there's tons of light. All the colours are bright. It's well lit. Everything's lovely and white. When it's cloudy, everything looks a little bit grey, doesn't it? And as it gets to night time, it can even be very hard to tell one colour from another. Like you have to get right up to something to see in the pitch black. If you go outside, you have to go right up to see to have any kind of clue what colour it is, because all the colours look the same in the dark. You know, blue looks like red, and everything's basically black or grey. Yeah, shades of grey. So yeah, that's the golden rule of lighting, or shading really as well. So anyway, that's mistake number 2. And from a certain point of view, all these mistakes are the same mistake, because it's just using the wrong color for shades and highlights. But we'll go to mistake number 3 now. Okay, so the final mistake is he has attempted to shade yellow with orange. And again, I suppose in a way this is the same mistake as before. When you think of highlights and shades, you sometimes can think of them as separate things, but really there's just there's no such thing as a highlight, strictly speaking. There's just varying degrees of shade, right? Excepting specular highlights or glossy highlights. That's a separate thing, perhaps. So when yellow gets less light, does it become orange? No. And another thing you'll see is shading with brown, but again, that's a different color. It's wrong. So I don't know. There's much to say really. It's just you don't. I mean, I think what they're trying to do here is they want to shade yellow. He wants to shade yellow, and he's not really sure how to do it. But he's got this idea. He's got to try and preserve the saturation. He's lost it. He's lost saturation doing that pink highlights on the chest thing, and he thinks he's saved the saturation by highlighting orange on top of the red, erroneously. And so, but if that's to him, he's thinking this is how you can preserve saturation with a highlight. Maybe he's thinking, oh well, okay, I can preserve saturation with a shadow by using a darker color, you know. And what's darker than yellow? He's imagining, a darker color than yellow is orange. Again, the logic is just wrong. It's not a dark orange. Is not a darker color than yellow. It's a different color than yellow. I mean, by that logic, green is darker than blue. You know, that's not. It's not how it works. Orange is not a shade. of yellow, and neither is brown, which he might otherwise have tried. If he thought that the orange looked wrong as a shade of yellow, he might have tried something wacky like brown. Actually wants to do the actual way to shade any color is with gray. Yeah, you mix in the gray because a shadow is desaturated compared to, as we already said, it's less light a color gets, the less color is reflected back, and the closest way to mimic that with paint is to desaturate it. This is with shadows. This is the one case where you do want to desaturate, and now you can use anything on the grayscale, any color on the grayscale you mix into a color will bring it closer to, will desaturate it. If you add white, if you add that sort of at the white end, you create a new color, a pastel, which is not what you want for a shadow, and it's not what you want for a highlight. You should treat pastels as different colors, essentially. And on the opposite end, you can mix black, but black is quite strong, and with most colors it will dominate it too much, and shadows tend not to be so brutal. They're not, unless you don't want any light coming back, in which case don't use a color at all, right? You shouldn't use black to desaturate and darken a color. What you need is gray, a mid-gray even, and that's the trick. Mid-gray. That's how you make a shadow out of a color. All right. So if you've been doing any of these strange things in order to try and get a highlight or a shade, I would suggest doing what I call a light map, or I think artists call a value sketch. Or actually, some people call it underpainting. And here's an example of a light sketch here I've done on this model. And what it is you're just painting in grayscale. So you're separating the whole issue of color out of it. You're not doing any color, just neutrals. And what the colors are representing here, so the grayscale, is various degrees of light and shade. So you can see it, the helmet there is quite white, and that's catching a lot of light. And when you've done something like this, then you can just straight up glaze over it with color and get something like this. And that's all your shades and highlights all in one go. And see, when the color goes over the top of white, the result isn't pink. I mean, for the red there, it's not pink, it's red, real bright red. And over the grey, it comes out a bit sort of darkish or desaturated. And over black, it looks, well, you don't really want to put the color over black. Yeah, so that, I mean, I'm not saying that's an amazing paint job or anything. It's a goodish tabletop standard. Yeah, what it is relatively realistic highlights and shades. Just what you need to do is you need to make sure your highlights are in full color and your shades are relatively desaturated, and it will look realistic then. Yeah, so that's that. I will make some videos on how to do various ways of how to paint a value sketch. There's quite a number of ways to do it. And when I have done this video, a link for it will appear here somewhere. And if it's not here, then I haven't done it yet. And so, just as a final thought, cartoons are not necessarily a terrible thing. Cartoony look, we can all go with a cartoony look sometimes. And if you do like a cartoony look, then you might consider this delightful design I've done, which is available on all kinds of t-shirts and merchandise type stuff, blankets, stickers, bags, all kinds of things. Isn't it cool? What is it? Would you see what that is? That's an orc skull. Yeah, you know what orcs are, right? And I've done it in a candy skull style, with all sorts of orky glyphs, which are in there as well. So it's quite a nice design. You could have that on your t-shirt or whatever. There will be a link for that in the description, but you can also find the link to my where you can buy these things in on the channel page. And yeah, so that's a nice cartoony thing you might actually want to buy. And if you did buy it, that would be great because that would like help me make these videos. And so that will do. Bye.